The legal issues that we encounter in cyberspace are many, they're varied. The geography, as you indicate, is a huge issue. The people who operate in cyberspace, who deal with it from a technical standpoint, technologically, they view it as essentially virtual domain, a unitary in many respects in their mind. Those who live in that world from a technological standpoint see it as unbounded by geography. But the nation states, of which we represent a significant one, they still take the position that geography matters in cyberspace. Under the laws, and international laws, domestic laws of the countries around the world, it does matter when things happen in those countries. Now, to what extent and to what level of actions and what level of implication of the laws there are, I think is still somewhat unsettled. We deal with those issues on a day-to-day basis, working out the legal and policy implications of actions and decisions that our commanders make. We weigh in on policies that are advocated by the National Command Authority with respect to what those tactical and operational ramifications of such policies are. And we feed into the decision-making process to help craft better policies and better laws in cyberspace. A lot of those relationships are just being developed and built, especially within the military. Understanding the command and control relationship between the US Cyber Command and the various combatant commands is something that is being worked out. It is sometimes a challenge. Different commanders, different leaders have different visions, but eventually those issues will all be resolved. It has not prevented us from carrying out our mission because everyone's working towards the same goal: secure, defensible networks. With respect to other domestic institutions, for instance FBI, we have a very close relationship. We have a lot of liaison officers with Cyber Command. FBI has liaison officers, and we're working very closely with them when there are law enforcement implications of the things that we discover on our networks. In terms of international, the President's international strategy for cyberspace indicates that we're going to build those connections, develop information sharing infrastructures, and help develop norms for behavior and conduct in cyberspace, beginning to work with, at the outset, like-minded countries. I think the important part of your question is the way you broke it down into the military aspect versus the law enforcement aspect of attribution. And in some respects, I think that they are very different. It's very important for law enforcement to understand and be able to prosecute who, what, when, where, why. When you look at a defensive perspective, attribution, I think, is often, or lack of attribution as it's sometimes thought of, is often overblown. I think there's two ways that it's overblown. I think that we have a lot more information and intelligence available about who's doing what. And then when it comes to a real threat to the network, to the country, the kind of attack undefined in the international strategy for which we would respond, I'm not sure that attribution matters as much as some would like to believe that it does. After all, if a missile's coming inbound to the United States, we don't attribute it to a threat country before we launch against it to try and defend the country from that missile. Or we don't try and determine if there's a threat aircraft, which terrorist group is involved in this hijacking this aircraft before we scramble aircraft and try and take defensive measures against it. So in that respect, from a threat standpoint, depending on the nature of the threat, if the threat is significant enough, attribution falls by the wayside. What matters is defending from that event. Again, with law enforcement, a completely different set of circumstances. When you think of cyber as a domain, whether it's a domain for manning, training, equipping forces, preparing forces to fight in any kind of environment, I think the main thing to keep in mind is there are already rules that exist. The Hague Conventions, the Geneva Conventions, you mentioned both sets of treaties, and those are sufficient, in the opinion of the United States, to govern the actions of nation states in cyberspace. When we start talking about armed conflict and warfare, we have the rules in place to govern our conduct. The fact that it's occurring in cyberspace, where that cyberspace as an adjunct, maybe an adjunct to an actual physical violence or physical attack, changes nothing about the fact that the same rules apply. It's just a different medium. Whether it's land, sea, or space, warfare is warfare. You're just using a different medium to conduct that warfare, and the same rules that have always applied should apply in that medium as well.
Excellent.
Well, I think the conference has met my expectations so far. It's been particularly helpful to hear the Ministry of Defense from the UK perspective. I know that there are quite a few individuals from the militaries and governments of Southeast and Southwest Asian nations, as well as European nations. So it's not just limited to Europe, but there are states like Malaysia and Saudi Arabia here. And seeing an exchange of ideas occur I think is critical, and it's helpful for everyone to understand and see other countries' best practices, particularly those countries that are looked at in this realm as leaders.